Can you hear that train whistle? That's the train. You see, storytelling is passed down from family to family. That's why it's so wonderful, and that's why we need it in bad times and good times. It brings the family closer together, and you want to know your family's history and the family history of your friends. But wait, I think I do hear the train. This story is an old story, and it has been really researched by people who think that it's true. When I was a teenager, I went down to look for the ghost. I took my girlfriend. The only problem was my old convertible car broke down and we got in so much trouble. And you know, we never did catch sight of the ghost. But I still tell the story. Rollin', 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 keep those wheels a-rollin'. It was a late night. The train was going through near Leland, near Wilmington, North Carolina, what it is today. Joe Baldwin was one of the best, strongest gentlemen they had. He was a conductor. He was the first African-American conductor and the best. There were many after him, but he was the first. He would row that lantern back and forth from the end of the caboose. That way, no oncoming trains could run into him. But one night, the tracks got switched, and a train headed down on the same track as their train. Wow, they could see it coming, that great big light shining, and he was hollering and waving his hands, and back then there was not much communication. He was screaming and yelling. Maybe they'd turn off. Maybe the rails had unclicked. What was he going to do? They were going to hit sure enough. So he waved that lantern as hard as he could, and he could hear the train wheels screeching to a halt, screeching in the night, screeching with that huge light. But the train wasn't able to stop all the way, and it came crashing into the back of Wiley's train. Cars were thrown off the tracks. The accident was told about for many, many years. And Joe Baldwin was a hero. He's still told about in Leland as a hero. But a few weeks later, something very strange happened. And darlings, this was decades ago, I'm talking, maybe even 100 years ago. Somebody was out near the tracks. They were coming home, and they could hear the trains going by, and they weren't getting too close. But they came upon the old bridge. Back in those days, trains had a lot of old bridges across the Cape Fear River and the Neuse and all these rivers here in North Carolina. And they happened to look up on the bridge, and they saw something. Now, the trains had not run on that bridge for a while, years, so it couldn't have been a train. So they went up close to the side of the track just so they could see what it was. And they saw it. Ah! Coming towards them. A great big round bright yellow light coming towards them faster and faster. Oh no, it was a train. It was going to kill them. They screamed and ran down the track and jumped off so they wouldn't be killed. And then the light went by and vanished. There was no train, just the light, and then it vanished. Well, of course, they went back into Wilmington and told that story. Folks didn't believe it. Soon other folks were coming out late at night. And there never really is a pattern. Is it a full moon? Sometimes. Is it the dark of the moon? Sometimes. Is it when big crowds are there? Not usually. But the legend of Joe Baldwin lives on in stories and in books. And you, too, can visit the place. You can get right up to that railroad and see if you see Joe Baldwin's lantern, but don't get too close. Because the story goes that every now and then, in the distance, you can see that round light, and it'll come closer and closer and closer, and you, too, may meet up with Joe Baldwin, the headless ghost. Now there's a head in this ghost. It's called the gentleman. Mary and Tom had just gotten married. Ah, sweet Charity, I love you every time we dance around. The wedding had been delightful, and they were on down the road to their honeymoon and to visit their Aunt Lucy. But it got later and later, and the old wagon was crickety. Back then you didn't have fancy cars. They didn't even have a very fancy horse. But it was a clodding along, and Mary was tired. It had been a long day. She said, honey, can't we just stop for the night? I bet there's an inn or something. Now, back then, you got to know, there were not motel hotels. None. You did not have Motel 6 leaving the light on for you, or Holiday Inn, or any of those ones. No, in fact, there was nothing. If you wanted to stay somewhere, you had to go to a little crossroads where there might be an inn, or one of those bed and breakfast things. Not that air bed thing they invented now. This is an old-timey one. And somebody might let you stay at their house. Well, that's what happened, because they saw two big stone gates up ahead, and the lights were lit in the lanterns. I know, this is going to be a perfect place, sweetheart. Let's go in here. And the gates were open wide. He drove the wagon on in, and they drove up to the front big fancy porch and a big fancy door. He said, I'm not sure about this, sweetheart. It's late. But all the lights were on in the house. So he went up and he went to knock on the door. But the door swung open all by itself. And when they got in there, by the fire, it was lit and it was right cozy and pretty in the parlor. Well, Mary was so chilled, she went in and she cuddled up with her shawl, and she says, okay, sweetheart, you find the host and hostess, and I'll just toast here by the fire. And that's what she did, and he took off. She hadn't waited long when she heard heavy footsteps coming in. She figured it was him coming back, and she started to peer around the edge, but she couldn't see anything. And then she heard a very cultured, nice voice that said, good evening. Welcome to our home. I'm so glad you joined us. I need your help. Well, we would just be very glad to help you. I can always help a person in need. We just didn't mean to walk right in. And then she turned, and she saw two fancy dress shoes. She saw a fancy pair of pants, a dress jacket, and on those shoulders, there was no head. She screamed, fell out of the chair, jumped back. She said, don't hurt me, please. And it kept talking and talking. It kept saying all this strange story to her about how robbers had broken in 100 years ago and taken all of his goods and accidentally chopped his head off. She was almost delirious. This was not possible. Where was her husband? But as she listened, the man was so gentle and so genuinely upset. She finally said, okay, I'll help you, but please don't hurt me or my husband. No, he said, do not worry. And with that, he turned and he kind of glided across the room, which was very strange with no head. And she saw him, and he went on down the hallway to a strange arched door. He opened the door and took her down these rickety old steps with spiders and mice. He held up the old-timey lantern she'd got for him, and she saw, strangely enough, the cellar floor was dirt. He got down there and he said, you see, my dear, I have to have your help. I've been trying to get my head and put it back where it belongs so I can rest in peace. Oh no, she thought, what have I done? Where is that husband? But She listened, and he took a shovel, and she picked it up with shaking hands and knew that he wanted her to dig in a dark corner. She thought, I'll just get this over with really, really fast. So she started digging a little, just a little. I mean, she was a strong girl, but just a little. And all of a sudden, clink, shovel hit something. Oh, no, she did not want to know what it had hit. She backed away from it, and she saw him there in the glue. She could just see a little bit of him. He was bending down, and something he picked up in the dirt was round and kind of dirty and white. And then, to her horror, he put it right on top of his shoulders. And when it was in place, before her flashed a handsome gentleman. And then with that, he was gone. She screamed and fell down. Her husband had found somebody to help her, but the man said, you got to get out of this house. We got to go get your wife, because this house is haunted by a headless spirit. Well, Tom was really worried by now. His bride was in trouble. So he went thundering around the house, and then they saw the open door. So they went down the steps just a-looking and a-watching, and then they saw her laying there on the dirt ground. They all screamed, well, the two of them, and it woke her up, and she kind of came to. She wasn't dead, thank heavens. He picked her up and helped her on upstairs, and she told the most terrifying tale. And then at the end she said, it was a good deed, sweetheart. He was so happy. She said, and he gave me a present. Her husband couldn't believe that, but he looked down, and indeed, there was a small leather bag. Now, back in the day, you can look in the History Museum, they had gold in North Carolina, and that gold was some of it in that little bag. Why, Tom was so impressed that he got them out of there fast. They went next door to the gentleman's house next door and spent the night, and he was about to leave, but they said, let's go down one more time. So when they were leaving, they took the wagon and the horse and went down, and to their shock, the beautiful mansion was gone. It was an old-looking, haunted-looking house with windows broke out and steps broken. It was strange, like that house had just been there for her to help. Let's get out of here, he said. Let's get out of here now. She was barely crying a little bit, thinking of that poor gentleman and hoping everything was fine. And then, just at the gate, something whispered in the wind, something whispered in her ear and said, thank you. Now I can rest in peace. And that's a story for you from the Uwharrie Mountains here in North Carolina. I put it in my first book, and you can get it at the museum shop and online. It's Folktales and Ghost Stories in North Carolina, Piedmont. You know, stories from right here, some of them true. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed these stories, and please come back for more.